I did watch on HBO Max. I did watch She's All That for the very pivotal Freddie Prinze Jr. hacky sack scene, and Paul Walker is in that movie.
Do you know who cleaned up the script on She's All That?
Joss Whedon, Tim O'Brien, Michael Marshall. Who was it? Paul Anderson?
Wait till you guess this twist.
Kevin Costner.
M. Night Shyamalan.
What?
Yeah, he cleaned up that movie. He was like the last person to touch the script before they filmed it.
He was like,
what a twist.
I mean, thank God he had My Fair Lady as source material just to rip off. Otherwise, he would have just crashed that vehicle straight into the rails.
So, like, I just watched this 30-minute long video about M. Night Shyamalan's career, and that's how I found that out.
I got an idea. So M. Night Shyamalan was like, guess what? Makeover scene. Turns out she's been hot the whole time.
The whole fucking time. That was his thing. And it worked. Tell me it didn't work. Tell me it didn't work. It worked. Fuck you.
Nailed it.
Hello and welcome to Subject to Blackout. I'm your host, Timo, and with me as always is Mike Marshall from the Name Taken podcast. Mike, how are you?
Good, Tim. How are you?
I'm pretty good. This week we tasked ourselves to watch Mortal Kombat 1995 because this Friday, Mortal Kombat 2021 drops, and that will be released both in theaters and in HBO Max. So, Michael, what did you think of Mortal Kombat 1995?
I mean, I have so many thoughts about this movie. I do want to point out again that 1995 was a banner year for science fiction and fantasy because it contained both Waterworld and the original Mortal Kombat movie.
I don't know if that's considered a banner year by most, but
banner year.
Certainly you're allowed to have that opinion. I can't stop you from saying that. I can't edit it out of the podcast if I choose to later, but I can't stop you from saying it right now. I have never seen this before. You've seen this multiple times, correct?
I've seen it multiple times, yeah. Although I got to say, I don't think I've seen it. It's probably been 10 years since I've seen it.
That makes sense. There were parts of it that were fun, bad, and that's always, enjoyable. But I gotta say, if you haven't seen this movie and are pretty hyped about Mortal Kombat 2021 coming out, you can skip this. Yeah, I know. I'd go back and play the video games before I would watch this again. It was very interesting. There were a lot of bold choices, let's say, by both the director and the actors.
Yep.
And there are some swings for the fences. There's overconfidence in this film, and it shows.
I admire just how passionate and optimistic people were about CGI in 1995.
Boy,
they were just
howdy.
like, this looks great.
Yeah, we'll get into it, but there is a largely CGI character in this movie where I didn't remember him from the video game series, and then he transforms into a non-CGI character, which is the character I recognize him as.
Right.
And they just went full CGI Gecko on it, and it does not look good. It does not look good.
I'm disappointed for a few reasons here. And it's not because I think it's Mortal Kombat's fault. It's because this predates like the Lord of the Rings trilogy and Andy Serkis by like 5 years.
Well,
if only Andy Serkis had been...
Andy Serkis was well alive at this point. Andy Serkis was 25 or something.
If Andy Serkis had been in Mortal Kombat, it would have been...
only he had
as like every
Reptile.
character. Yeah.
Yeah. Andy Serkis would have made Andy Serkis. Honestly, and I actually just the other day watched The Prestige for the first time in a long time. And Andy Serkis plays a normal human non-CGI character in that, which is rare for Andy Serkis. Yeah. But Andy Serkis is good in everything he's in. Andy
Serkis rules.
Whether he's CGI or otherwise. And Andy Serkis, again, CGI or otherwise, would have been a vast improvement on any single part of this series.
I mean, I remember about a year ago, almost to the date, he read the entirety of The Hobbit and did all of the voices for some kind of COVID thing.
Wow.
I watched a great deal of it. It was wholesome. It was great.
I wish I had known about it. That sounds fantastic.
It was great. So that was one of my criticisms. Andy Serkis wasn't in it.
It's fair. It's bold, but it's fair.
Who casted this? Who casted the movie?
I can't believe they didn't cast an unknown Andy Serkis to be in this movie. They casted everyone else unknown to be in this movie.
So actually, I wanted to talk to you about that. So one of the things about this movie, I think we're going to have a long discussion about the fan service and how they handled fan service. But one of the unfortunate parts of fan service, or one of the overlooked elements here that I'd like to criticize, was Raiden was not played by a pointy hat dude who yells incomprehensible stuff and does that Superman thing.
Yeah.
It was played by this white dude who isn't David Carradine, but sure looks like David Carradine.
I will tell you also,
assumes a role that David Carradine would typically assume.
David Carradine would have been 10,000 times better than this guy, who is in almost nothing else. While watching the film, I was like, is this guy in other things? And he isn't. But let me tell you what I wrote down in my notes when I first saw him on screen. Raiden is a white guy? ? Why does he look like Tom Jane and sound like Christoph Waltz? he has this vague German French accent that I think he's putting on because no one has a vague German French accent in real life. And he looks exactly like Tom Jane and is most definitely not Tom Jane. Also, Tom Jane would have been a better Raiden than this guy.
So I looked that dude up, and I mean, you're dead on with the accent. So Christopher Lambert or Lambert, he's an American-born French actor. So he's confusingly and somewhat ambiguously French or American. He was in Highlander and a bunch of other stuff. Whatever. Here's the detail that I want to go to, because this is something I noticed even before hopping on the Wikipedia page, and that was in a number of scenes where he's featured with other actors, he seems to be looking in a number of different directions, and none of them are at people. Correct. And there's a reason for that, and it's not because they film stuff separately. I'm going to read you this from the Wikipedia. So Lambert has profound myopia and cannot see without his glasses. He cannot wear contact lenses and often has to act virtually blind. Wow. Which has led to injuries while performing his own stunts. So when he's like looking off in random directions throughout the movie and talking, it's because he actually can't see anything. That's why he looks unfocused throughout like the entire movie.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So here's another thing that I looked up. Any guesses to who composed the music? There was a composer.
Danny Elfman.
It was George Clinton.
Of the Parliamental Funk?
No. George Clinton, who scored Cheech and Chong's Still Smoking and Cheech and Chong's The Corsican Brothers and Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery.
Okay,
and Mortal Kombat.
Okay, International Man of Mystery is there's some recognizable good, songs on that soundtrack. If he did the themed Austin Powers, then he did a damn fine job on that. In this movie, the most iconic song is directly taken from the video games and plays the moment the film starts.
It does. And then they kind of slam into it a few other times too.
Yeah, the rest of the music, I honestly do not remember. It's a little disappointing to find out that he did something as halfway decent as Austin Powers, because with the video game music that obviously they knew was integral to at least part, like you had to use it in some part of the film. He didn't take that as inspiration. Instead, he just created background music. I'm actually disappointed by this fact. Like, Austin Powers has some hits, has some bops. Hey everybody, I just wanted to take a second here to talk about what's coming up soon on Subject to Blackout. Next week, me and Mike will be reviewing Mortal Kombat 2021. The HBO and theatrical release of this film came out on Friday. I am speaking from the future. This is actually Saturday morning, and the film came out last night. Me and Mike are actually going to watch it together probably this afternoon, and looking forward to it. The following week, we're going to review Mystery Men, the cult classic 1999 film starring William H. Macy, Ben Stiller, Kel from Kenan and Kel, Jeffrey Rush. There's a whole cast of characters. Mystery Men was a favorite of both of ours growing up, so we're interested to see if it still holds up. If you'd like to watch it before we review it, it is going to be on Netflix until the 30th of April. And coming up in June, we're proud to announce we're doing what we're calling the Furiously Fast Film Festival. Neither Mike nor I are experts in the field of Fast and Furious movies, but we are going to drown ourselves in what has become one of the largest non-MCU film franchises of all time. Every week in June, Mike and I are going to watch and review 2 of the Fast and the Furious films. Neither Mike nor I have seen most of these films at all, let alone from beginning to end, but we are both looking forward to reviewing all of them before the release in late June on HBO Max and in theaters of Fast 9. Now, I have many friends and acquaintances who love these movies, so maybe we'll hear a few guest appearances or a few other surprises along the way. But again, look for the Furiously Fast Film Festival on a podcasting app near you. I'd like to talk about some of the other members of the cast of this film.
Sure.
Specifically, Bridget Wilson, or as she is now known, Bridget Wilson.
Teacher from Billy Madison.
Bridget Wilson Sampras. Because since the year 2000... Bridget Wilson has been married to Pete Sampras.
Oh, see, I didn't realize she had a name. I thought she was just in this and Billy Madison, and that was like the entirety of her.
While watching this, I was like, well, how the fuck do I know her? And I Googled the cast for this film while watching this film because I was uninterested with it because it wasn't good. But then I saw Sampras and I was like, bullshit. Is that how I know her? That he's... Like, I know Pete Sampras. Like, I watched tennis in the 90s. Is that how I know her? And then I click through. Yes, she is married to Pete Sampras. But as you said, she's also the teacher from Billy Madison. And that's the only other place that I've seen her.
Way to go. Honestly, like, just do back-to-back Billy Madison, Mortal Kombat, and in the afterglow, marry Pete Sampras?
That's called a grand
That's better than I've
slam.
Done.
Okay.
Yeah, you're in the zone.
That's better than most people would have done. She's 47 years old now, 47 years young, and still married to Pete Sampras, happily after 21 years of marriage. So congratulations to Bridget Wilson and Pete Sampras, and hopefully she does more Billy Madisons in the future and way less Mortal Kombat 1995s.
Yeah, I mean, Pete Sampras has 14 Grand Slams, which is quite a few. Seven Wimbledon. Yeah, I know both that tennis tournament and that number. That's a high number.
We're proud of you. I didn't think you could count that high without taking off your shoes. Bridget Wilson should be commended, though, Bridget Wilson Sampras, because she is by far the best actor in this entire film.
Yep.
Without question. And while she is not the lead, this movie definitely digs into several tropes, which I will get into shortly. But the rest of the cast is basically what feels like amateur actors and or like B or C-list actors just hamming it up to the extreme. The chief villain is over the top in ways which is actually funny. I don't know if it's intentionally so. It doesn't feel intentionally so. But yeah, it is pretty outlandish and camp. Everyone else, though, it just it's a pretty rough watch acting wise. I think these days we're used to a certain level of ability in most mainstream films, and this feels far below that.
Right.
But speaking to some of the standard tropes that they have no problem dealing in, at one point they go to a place called the Temple of Light, China. That's the location. Mike, you lived in China for the better part of a dozen years.
Right.
Have you been to Temple of Light, China? Was that ever on your travels?
I have been to the location, to the Oriental location, and it's actually a place. I confirmed it, but I think everyone would think it's like just Angkor Wat, right? Like that whole temple and everything. It's not. It's in Thailand. It's a place called Ayutthaya. So I've been to Ayutthaya.
The Temple of Light in China is not in China. That's disappointing. More back into the stereotypes. Of course, the one black character is the first one to get murdered.
He dies. Yep, he dies really fast.
Like, there's no, like, everyone has, like, a job or, like, characteristics, and that's how we meet them. And the black guy is just like, hey, guy with a name, and then we never see him again until the scene where he's murdered.
Yeah, and but Johnny Cage is like really broken up about it.
Oh,
he's really bummed.
All three of them are. They all scream separately, like 20 to 30 seconds apart, which makes it like, did you guys not realize that he just got murdered? Because that was a minute and a half ago. Also, the girl, Bridget Wilson, needs saving, despite the fact that throughout the film she talks about how she doesn't need saving. She is, in fact, in desperate need of saving at the end.
Yep,
and they put her in a frilly dress, whereas she's been wearing like black jeans and a black shirt the entire film.
Yeah,
all
and then
of a sudden she's in a
totally down.
Dress.
Yeah, totally down for Johnny Cage.
And the white guy has all of the quips. None of them are good or original or even really make sense most of the time. But he is the quippy cool guy. All of the Asians know the karates. There are literally 30 thrown away. Like, they're in one shot just of Asian guys. Like, this whole tournament is supposed to be selected from out all of the world of the best fighters. And it's a white guy, a white girl, a black guy who dies immediately, and then 30 Asians.
See, so here's the note, because we're talking about the notes. So here's the note that I have written down about that. Mortal Kombat invents new types of Orientalism, but is still more thoughtful and more racially sensitive than M. Night Shyamalan's Avatar.
Oh, man.
You're the Avatar, right?
Yeah, speaking of bad films, that's another one that I've never watched.
Yeah. It still does a better job than Avatar.
Yeah, I have another question. Why is no one scared at any point in this film
That's a good question. And the other one is like, how much time does it take? Do they have like hotel rooms where they go to between matches and stuff? They just seem to be hanging out in this temple, and like Raiden shows up and he's like, is he helping them? He seems like kind of mean. And
I have so many questions.
Where do they stay? Do they eat?
Okay, so this is one of the most tangential questions. I didn't even think I'd bring it up on the pod, but now I have to, because it hours after watching this film, it is the only thing I can think of. The dimensional place where they go to have all of the actual Mortal Kombat fights.
Yeah, I've been calling that Sega Genesis.
Sure. It appears to be, to our human eyes, a very rocky, hilly landscape, an extremely rocky, mountainous landscape of an island. And then at some point in the middle of the film, for no reason, two characters are walking in a planned forest. And a planned forest, if you don't know the term, is where they, a government or a local community decides that they're going to replant trees to rebuild a forest. And the way that they do that is just by planting all the trees in a row, because humans aren't great at randomness, so we crave organization. So all of these trees are in perfect line. They're all the exact same age of tree, and it is a large, flat, open space, which this island does not contain. We've seen all of the island from like helicopter shots outside of it, and yet for some reason this fight happens in a planned forest, and it makes no fucking sense. It's a terrible scene because they try to use CGI and they can't use CGI in this film. It is demonstrably upsetting that this film came out 2 years after Jurassic Park and it looks this bad. Like, one of the main characters is a guy wearing a set of arms and shoulders and a head on top of his arms and shoulders and head.
Yeah, I like that it was like kind of Jason and the Argonauts and kind of janky.
Like, I appreciate that they didn't go for a CGI face on him because they could not have pulled it off. But the animatronic face, like literally all of his lines are just him screaming and yelling, because that's the only kind of mouth motion that they could create with the animatronic.
Yeah.
I'm glad they didn't try to. Man, they went for one full CGI character and it turned out bad enough. I'm glad they didn't go for a second.
I mean, I am absolutely. First of all, I thought it was endearing. So, like, there are lots of elements to the movie like that I found endearing as being kind of like emblematic of the era. Like, one of the other things that I noticed, especially with the sets, and the style of fantasy, I really don't think that has been revisited or recreated until Shazam from a couple years ago. I think Shazam, especially in that alternate reality where there's that dude who gives Billy Shazam powers.
Yeah, the guy from Gladiator.
Yeah, I think that really kind of like has that same kind of 90s fantasy action aesthetic. But there's something kind of distinctive about that aesthetic that's present in the entire movie, which I like. I have a nostalgic fondness for. And I think Goro is a good example of that.
And that whole style comes out strong early in the film. As I wrote in my notes while watching, I just wrote at the beginning, there are a lot of big swings. First of all, including the title credits and like the, Touchstone Pictures and all that shit rolling, within a minute and 45 of the film starting, someone is murdered. Yeah. So that's a big swing. Like, hello, here's the two, companies that finance this film, and murder. Like, that's how quickly it happens. They also go for a bizarre sky effect where it's like weirdly colored and moving like 8 times too fast. And they never revisit that effect again, as far as I remember.
No, I don't. Yeah.
And then one of our main characters, Liu Kang, wakes up in his bedroom from like startled awake from sleep, and his bedroom is bathed exclusively in green light. And all of this happens within the first 3 minutes of the film. And it's just like, wow, all right, we're going for some stuff. And I'm kind of disappointed that it felt like it rolled back. It felt more generic after that.
Sure. It kind of loses energy in the middle because there's a lot of acting.
Yeah, unfortunately. And that really gets in the way of some of the big decisions that they could have made. The Goron or whatever the fuck his name is. He's definitely, it felt like at multiple points, I felt like this feels like it's in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie universe.
Oh, totally. I was thinking about that too. Like, where's Shredder?
Yeah, and both Scorpion, well, not both, all three, Scorpion, Reptile, and Sub-Zero, all very much reminiscent of Shredder, but I don't know which came first in the aesthetics of those characters.
Do you think Sub-Zero is Fahrenheit or Celsius?
He's Kelvin.
Is he?
That's how cold he is. He's below known cold points.
I'm gonna look that up. Let's Kelvin to Celsius.
Kelvin is absolute zero. Kelvin is when
it's really cold.
There is no temperature below zero, but that's how Sub-Zero is. That's how sub he is.
Wow, Tim, way to remember that.
I mean, I don't know. I just know
zero Kelvin is 273 negative 273 Celsius. Yeah,
it's absolute zero. Also, I thought some of the other parts that reminded me of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were like sort of main cast, but minor main cast characters just being horrific at acting. And also some of the sets were just kind of like, this isn't a place that exists. Specifically, the scene I'm thinking of is when Scorpion fights Johnny Cage, and they're just in a sea of platforms and ladders, and like you get shots from above and all you see below is platforms and ladders. And then you get shots from below and all you see above is platforms and ladders. And so this whole place doesn't seem to exist in the universe that makes any sense within the movie. Like, it's just a place where it's like, oh, this looks cool. This looks like a setting in a video game.
Yeah, they like warped onto a different map, didn't they?
Yeah. It's a bizarre choice, but like, I kind of think I get what they were going for, is like, oh, this is like dynamic and interesting as a background, and we can light this really interestingly. But as far as being a part of a coherent movie, it just personally just takes me right out of it. But again, it makes me feel like that is something that I would see in the background of one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies from the 90s. And those movies are fucking cinema with a capital C compared to this movie. I mean,
again, I would call that a particular like 90s aesthetic to fantasy action, but I think some of those environments, at least in this movie, speak to an attempt to be authentic to the video game. And there were some choices that they made about being authentic to the video game that kind of predate, I think, a lot more fan servicey type media that kind of kicked into high gear with the Phantom Menace. But one of the things that comes up over and over and over again, since you mentioned it with Scorpion, was he doesn't just say "get over here" like 5 or 6 times. He also
get down here.
Yeah, he introduces directionality to it, which is kind of like a little bit. That was a little bit overdoing it. Yeah, like, all right. There was also like fatality gets checked, which the first time was kind of rad, and like the second time was fine, and then like the 7th time was like
the first time that the big bad says flawless victory, I was like, that was well worked into the script. When fights like, because a guy came in and just absolutely got every strike in, was not hit, and now the other murdered a guy, and he's just like, fatality. Oh, flawless. It wasn't flawless. Like,
finish him.
Yeah. I mean, the finish hims, at one
they
point,
came up a bunch. Yeah.
At one point, they were just like, fight. Like, okay, yeah, I mean, that is a thing the video game says, but like, I don't think we need that one. The flawless victory one the first time was good. Yeah, fatality got a little stale, but yeah, I mean, they were trying to, clearly trying to replicate what someone who is 45 thought interested the kids about the game, when it was actually like, yeah, it was cool that they said fight and the music was cool and all the guys look cool, but like, it was about the competitive nature of it. And I feel like most of the fight scenes are subpar. They don't feel choreographed well. I feel like they didn't know how to shoot them, because a lot of the scenes you see these, you know, pulled punches and pulled elbows and stuff, but they shoot them in slow motion, which only accentuates how pulled they are. Mm-hmm. And boy, I mean, like, if you're going to make this movie work with this cast, with this budget, like, you have to absolutely make sure that you're getting these fight scenes correct, because I found them bland and unconvincing.
I think that was the era too. Like, it was still kind of a B movie. It was kind of campy, like taking these things really seriously budget wise, and like really developing the fight choreography, I think, has really been something that's developed over the past 20 years. I still think that the 70s to the 90s were kind of like a different tradition. Remember that at that point, Waterworld, again in 1995, was by far the highest budget movie ever made, and that was only like $200 million, which was wild.
And to be fair, $200 million in 1990 is much more these days. And a lot of that money was spent because multiple floating sets sank and had to be rebuilt. So it wasn't money well spent on that particular film. But I will say, like, one of my problems is that at one point, the character played by Bridget Wilson Sampras is in a fight against someone who killed her partner, and by partner I mean police partner.
Yeah, war person,
military partner.
Mercenary.
It's never established. Yeah, it's never established what her job actually is. That'd be character development, and this film does not tread in that. Mm-mm. So she's fighting against this guy, and at one point she does just like a simple like roundhouse kick to the face. And the camera follows the kick, and she is still in frame after the kick goes by, and you can watch her fall down. That to me was like, boy, we couldn't get a better take of that. Like, she fell, like she landed on her feet and you could see her momentum take her over. She's supposed to be Earth's elite fighter. Like, that's
true. These people were supposed to be Earth's elite fighters.
That's the whole first 30 minutes of this film, is like this guy convincing all of these elite world fighters to get tricked to come on this boat and go to this other world. And she can't even do a roundhouse kick without falling over. Like, I get that the actress can't do it. Like, that's extremely hard. But the movie, for me, just, it was repeatedly taking me out of it, either by bizarre acting choices or just, like, not caring enough about the action. Like, if you're gonna have not great actors in a movie like this, you gotta nail the action scenes. And they don't have to be John Wick, because obviously, like you were saying,
love that movie,
that wasn't the aesthetic of the 90s.
Yeah.
But they have to be competent, and it didn't feel like they even crossed that bar.
That's fair enough. I can respect that more than your opinion on Blade Runner.
The right opinion. All right. Let's change the subject. What did you just enjoy about this film? And I will start. One of my favorite parts was when Raiden, upon first meeting our characters on the boat that takes them to Mortal Kombat land, he like saves them from being destroyed by Scorpion and Sub-Zero. And Raiden turns to our three human main characters and goes, "Come with me. and then he turns into like a plasma and then just like floats away.
Right.
And all three of our main characters, nonplussed, were like, well, let's follow the plasma. That to me was my absolute favorite part. Favorite fucking scene. It made no fucking sense, and everyone just went with it. It was so great.
Like Raiden shows up a few times, like Glenda the Good Witch style. Yeah, I mean, I like movies that don't take themselves so seriously that they can kind of like, you know, experiment. So I mean, I enjoyed all of the sets, and I thought that the emphasis on like deeply one-dimensional characters made it kind of like you described it. I wouldn't call this like a good movie by any stretch of the imagination, but I would absolutely call it fun. I think it's kind of like a fun bad movie. And I think it was kind of intended to be a fun bad movie. I don't think it was intended to be cinema.
No, obviously not.
But yeah, overall, I like that. One thing, like I couldn't remember every detail of the movie, although I remembered a lot. I liked how many times that they threw down the Mortal Kombat extended 10-inch club cut of the theme. But something that they didn't do that I thought they would have done that I'm sure they're going to do in this new one is a shot composed like a two-dimensional fight sequence. So there were a couple times in the movie where they replicated some of the fight moves, like the bicycle kicks and stuff from the actual game. But they never replicated an actual screen of two fighters coming at each other like on a two-dimensional plane.
They almost did.
I
think they tried when Sub-Zero, was facing off with Liu Kang.
Yeah.
They like Sub-Zero came down like a stairwell.
Yeah.
And then they both kind of posed. I could feel what they were going for, but they just didn't nail it.
Yeah. I'm sure that is something that, like, on early storyboarding meetings for this Mortal Kombat was, well, that's got to be in there. So yeah. I'm sure we'll see that executed really well in the new one.
One of my favorite things in the early scenes was the Bridget Wilson Sampras character has a big old gun as she's chasing down someone in presumably Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And she has a big scope on her single barrel shotgun, which usually don't see too many large scopes on shotguns. And it turns out her scope is actually just a flashlight. It's just a big old flashlight. I enjoyed that quite a bit.
I think it's deeply unfair that she couldn't use guns as part of her Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, I mean that would have probably made the movie wrap up about I don't know, an hour earlier.
Well, like if you can use superpowers and stuff, like you can shoot ice or like a
I'm not
like
disagreeing.
A worm thing, then like why can't you have a gun?
Okay, speaking of worm things, let's get into the dumbest character in this movie.
Kano.
No, I want to call him Reptar, but.
Reptile?
That's from Rugrats. Yeah, Reptile.
Yeah, Reptile was confusing because he's what was that? It's like a really bad CGI. Like we're not even talking about Pixar. We're talking about like anybody who wasn't Pixar in the 90s trying to do CGI, where it was like extremely out of place and like really glossy. Like the lighting on it was different than everything around it. You know, like the dynamic lighting just didn't exist yet, that sort of thing.
Basically, it's a CGI character that looks like a worse version of the Geico Gecko. Even when he's supposed to be invisible, the CGI is shaky at best. And then the thing that bugged me about it is Reptile is not a gecko-looking creature at any point in the Mortal Kombat series, at least as far as I remember.
Mm-hmm.
He just looked like Sub-Zero and Scorpion, but instead of respectively blue and yellow, he wore like a green outfit. And he eventually transforms into that briefly, is kind of in a halfway decent fight for this movie. And then at the end, when he's about to be killed, he turns back into the Reptile CGI character,
right,
which again, they cannot pull off. and he's thrown into like a statue, and he turns into like maggots and cockroaches. This movie's all over the place with Reptile, and it really seemed like something that they fucked up that they really didn't need to.
I mean, I can't really explain the plot of the movie if you ask me to.
Correct.
But I mean, I can't explain the plot of the video game either, so, you know.
What even is film?
Indeed. Quite indeed. So the cool thing for me about us watching Mortal Kombat in 1995 before we sit down, probably this weekend to watch Mortal Kombat 2021, is going to be how the culture of the game and the franchise has changed and how we'll be able to view that change through the fan service. And it's also going to actually show major differences between the ways that producers, directors, whole film industry attempts to connect with different types of audiences. You know, the ways that you're trying to cater to a minority of people who are going to be familiar with certain references while also trying to draw a bunch of other people who aren't going to be as familiar or are going to have a cursory knowledge of the franchise. Or are going to be like us, who really haven't touched the video games in, probably 15 years, maybe more than that.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see how they handle fan service, because like we said, for this one, they were using a lot of the terms, right? Like flawless, and they're using fight, and they're using get over here, and they're using all those sorts of things. So I'm interested to see how those types of elements are incorporated into the new movie.
Yeah, honestly, I think films like this, and I think films like Super Mario Brothers, and I think early adaptations of video games. Hell, Paul W.S. Anderson, who is the director of this film, the majority of his career he's spent making Resident Evil films.
That's right.
So the man knows his way around a video game movie. And some would say that maybe he doesn't know his way well around them, but he knows his way around a video game movie. And I think the clash that video games have with cinema, because there's very few, if any, great video game adaptations.
Yeah.
The problem is twofold. Is early video games were not made with story arcs. You know,
yeah, fair point.
Super Mario Brothers did not have a story arc. Link and stuff, I guess you could say, has a story arc, but it's not really an arc. It's just like it's levels, and that's something that's hard to translate to traditional television and traditional cinema.
Word, we gotta call that one Zelda. Also, I mean, there was the cartoon. There were, in addition to movies, there were the early cartoons of both Mario Brothers and Zelda. We should really sit down and watch all of those Zelda cartoons, by the way. But
that is outside the scope of traditional storytelling as well, because those are Saturday morning cartoons, and you can be a little bit more serialized, and you can also diverge from the original content, where this is trying to capture what was great about the original content and distill it into an hour 45.
Mm-hmm.
And for a game where it's you pick a fighter and your friend picks a fighter, and you just fight against each other, and trying to create a narrative storyline out of that,
mm-hmm.
to some extent deserves commendation, especially doing it in the 1990s when some of the characters do not look like anyone in the real world, and they swung for the fences, you know? To that, I will give them some credit, which bolsters my opinion of 2021's adaptation. I feel like with the state of current CGI, and with the fact that all of these series have been retold over so many different versions of these video games, that even if you create a narrative out of whole cloth, I feel like 2021 is much more suited to do that
mm-hmm.
than 1995.
Mm-hmm.
is taking bits and pieces of something that people like, providing a little bit of fan service, and creating a coherent narrative storyline. So I'm looking forward to seeing if they can actually pull it off. But I think that also makes me excited about the narrative storyline video games that are now trending to become television and film.
Sure.
Your Halos of the world have been talked about becoming movies for a long time.
Years.
Last of Us is going to be an HBO series. I think over the last 20 years, 25 years really, the two mediums have become closer than they've ever been before. And again, I think because of how completely separate they were in the year 1995, the difference between what a video game meant and what a movie meant. While this is not a good movie, I will say that they tried to create a coherent plot and coherent characters out of what was just a fighting game. And they almost pulled it off. I'd say like 65 to 75% of the way they pulled it off. But it's just that last little bit where it was too tenuous, and it was too much to ask out of 1995. But like I said, from the beginning, they swung for the fences, and I will commend them for that.
So, I mean, it's going to be, I'm looking forward to us watching the next one so that we can weigh in here. But if you had to take either an existing or revive an old video game franchise and make it into, like, let's say like a film franchise, let's say 3 movies, what video game franchise would you choose?
I have to make 3 movies. And when can I pick the video game franchise from?
Any era, Pong onwards.
So I can pick Cyberpunk 2077 if I wanted to.
You could pick that and make it into a movie, sure. It would be like, The Matrix. It would be.
I mean,
but you could make
give
it.
me an example of what you're thinking of.
Turok the Dinosaur Hunter.
All right. What is?
Wouldn't you watch that movie?
Yeah, but what is your plot for? What's your elevator pitch for Turok the Dinosaur Hunter?
I don't know. He ends up on a planet with dinosaurs and he has to shoot grenades at them.
Okay. If I'm gonna go something in like the 90s, early 2000s era, and I have to make 3 motion pictures out of it, I'm going to do Star Fox.
Ooh, like CGI?
I'm going to do it as a either cartoon or Pixar movie.
That would work.
But I'm going to develop the backstory of Star Fox and his compadres. And, the first movie is about them learning to, develop into the star-fighting pilots that they always knew they could be.
Sure.
By believing in themselves. And then the next couple movies, they fight against evil people, but maybe they're not so evil. And actually, it's just our differences that are lost in translation.
That sounds bad. You know what I have? I have Chris Hemsworth shooting grenades at raptors. And you have people learning about themselves and working together to solve problems to become better people.
I'm just thinking of...
Or animals. Chris Hemsworth shooting grenades at T-Rexes.
You can't get Chris Hemsworth.
He's down.
He hates you. I know this.
I can get to Chris Hemsworth.
I bet you can. And he hates you.
Okay, here's another one. So, of all the video game movies you have seen, what do you think is the best one? And what makes it better than Mortal Kombat 1995?
God, I hope this isn't the best video game movie that I've ever seen, but The Doom movie with The Rock is a better movie. It's a better movie. The plot is more coherent. The first person action scene at the end is super fun.
I like that. Yeah. I thought that was really good.
The Rock is name a thing The Rock isn't charismatically charming in. You can't.
I agree.
Halo has done a bunch of live action like promo stuff, like not like 2 to 5 minutes, like an hour and a half of promo stuff that they've filmed with like live action characters. That is actually pretty interesting. I'm convinced that Halo as your HBO, Showtime, Hulu, Netflix series would be a success because there's a lot to write there. But the stuff that they've done just for promotion has been excellent at times. I'm trying to think of other video game based movies. Yeah, so I'm currently looking at a list of video game movies on the Google box. You know, there's Sonic, which came out recently, which people seem to like. I have not seen it. There was a shitty Assassin's Creed movie, and
ooh, was there?
Yeah, that was apparently very bad. The Warcraft movie, I didn't hear anything good about.
Yeah, I watched that.
Anything bad about?
That was one of the types of movies that, I mean, because I was living in China and I was probably flying every 2 to 3 months, I would just pick a movie for planes. And that, like, I hope I have an opportunity to now bring this up every podcast. And that movie, just like the David Harbour Hellboy movie, were movies that I watched on planes.
That's 4 in a row. You've brought up that movie 4 times. Do you love that movie? It's fine if you love that movie. And I like the Hellboy movies. I just haven't seen that one.
And I don't remember anything from that movie, but I know I watched it.
Do you remember that Timothy Olyphant played Hitman Agent 47?
In
Hitman.
I never saw Hitman.
He did it. Honestly, though, the most successful is probably Tomb Raider with Angelina Jolie.
That was a go back and watch it just to watch Daniel Craig in a supporting role have like an American, like an Iowa American accent. Like, hey, Lara. It's totally worth it just for like a really disorienting Daniel Craig accent.
So, Mike, have you been watching anything other than Mortal Kombat this week?
Oh, I watched She's All That.
Why?
There's a pretty critical hacky sacking scene in She's All That, and
so it all goes back to the Name Taken podcast.
So it goes back to the Name Taken podcast. Now I'm back into hacky sacking, like I was like as a 16-year-old. So, and I was like. I really wanted to see it represented in cinema, and Freddie Prinze Jr. Pretty critical scene in She's All That, 1999's She's All That, a ripoff of My Fair Lady / Pygmalion. And in order to impress an arty introverted girl, he has to perform performance art, and he hacky sacks. And it's great. It's a great scene.
Transcendent film.
Transcendent film. It made me reflect a lot on the genre of teen films, which I don't think exists in that way anymore.
No, most definitely not.
Yeah. But again, most importantly, all-star cast. Freddie Prinze Jr. Rachel Lee Cook. Can't remember what she did after that. Probably, something. Yeah. Paul Walker is like the best kind of douchebag for the entire movie. Like his job, he's Freddie Prinze Jr.'s friend. Also, hang on. Do you remember not another teen movie where Captain America, which Chris is he? Chris Evans. So Chris Evans has a scene.
He's the star quarterback. Yeah.
Where he looks at a
douchebag.
Yeah, and he looks at a photo of himself on a wall. Do you remember that?
I do.
That scene is in She's All That, where Freddie Prinze Jr. literally looks at his own photo in his high school.
That's what satire was based off of.
Yeah. God, She's All That's a fantastic movie. Totally recommend it. But Paul Walker is like Freddie Prinze Jr.'s friend, and they don't really. It's not clear why they have a friendship, because like Freddie Prinze Jr. is like kind of a nice jock type, and Paul Walker is sort of like, yo, dude, I bet she has like really sweet bobos.
I bet she does though. Like,
and like everybody's like 30. Everybody's like 30.
That's true.
I totally recommend She's All That on HBO Max.
Yeah, it took till like the mid 2010s before they were like, hey, maybe we shouldn't cast 30-year-olds as high schoolers.
Yeah,
because like Spider-Man 3, like Joe Manganiello or whatever the fuck his name is plays like the high school bully in Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And he's 37
old.
years old in that movie. And Tobey Maguire isn't better. Tobey Maguire is at least like 28 years old.
Yeah, Kirsten Dunst.
Like Tobey Maguire has a mortgage independent of being an actor.
Yeah,
he just has a mortgage because he's old enough to have one.
Like half of the high school students had been through a divorce in that movie.
Oh yeah. They've all had to call someone and tell them that they have HPV.
Yeah. So yes, I like little Tom, what's his face, who's our current Spider-Man, Tom
Holland.
Tom Holland. Okay. I watched Batman the Animated Series.
I watched the first episode of that recently.
Do you know that they drew it all the backgrounds on black paper? That's why it looks super moody. Yeah. Okay. Well, that was the big thing about that. Mark Hamill, voice of the Joker.
Mark Hamill's in
Mortal Kombat. Tomb Raider. She's All That.
Invincible. The cartoon on Amazon Prime that I was telling you about a couple weeks ago about superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he plays a character in it. It's a good story. All right. Well, as I said in the middle of the podcast, next week we are going to be doing Mortal Kombat 2021. The first 7 minutes are online now, and as of Friday, that movie will drop both in theaters and on HBO Max. So, if you'd like to join us, feel free to watch Mortal Kombat 2021, and next week we will have our little take on it.
Totally.
And if anyone wants to follow along with Subject to Blackout, you can join us on all of your favorite podcasting apps, or you can visit subjecttoblackout.com. Mike, I just want to thank you again for joining me.
Cheers, Tim.
All right, see everybody next week.